like to come on stage. If not, I may pick on you back there, even though you'll be off camera. I will make you talk. So definitely want Layla up here. Reggie, David, I have some questions for you for reservation. Come on up. Don and Troy, if you don't mind. We got 5 seats. Taz or Pui, someone else want to come up? Okay. While they're coming up, I have a couple of things that are quickie answers that will address a lot of the questions that have come in over the course of the day. And so I'm going to, while they're getting set up, I just want to run through them. First of all, and perhaps most important, in CDER Direct, please take advantage of all the wonderful help facilities that are in there. There's tutorials, there's quick user guides, there's links to our website, to all the regulations, to all the guidances and all that. They are very helpful. And if you have any suggestions for more help, please let us know. We're happy to add to that. Second, we literally got hundreds of questions. We will not be able to get to them all. If you still have, if our questions, or I should say, if our answers up here do not answer what your question was, or if we tried to address the subject and we still didn't quite get to your nuance of it, please, please, please feel free to submit your question to edrls@fda.hhs.gov, and we will get it answered, I promise. We had a couple of questions about DEA schedule and how to find the right one, or the errors in submitting a drug listing and they get a DEA schedule error. We, the FDA, do not establish or set the DEA schedule. That is, in fact, the DEA. So you can go to their controlled substance website at dea.gov. I have the big long URL in my email from one of my staffers, but I don't want to sit here and spell it out over the next 5 minutes. But just, if you go to dea.gov, to their controlled substance website, it's product specific. It's not just this active ingredient is always this schedule. It generally follows that, but there are exceptions and exemptions and all that stuff that might bump a particular product up or down on the DEA schedule. So if you are unsure about a product, go there and look it up. We use their data to enforce our SPL validation. There were a couple of questions or follow-ups to the question about WDD 3PL registrations and requirements. So for those of you who need it and those of you at home or at work who are watching, if you have questions about wholesale drug distributor, third-party logistic requirements, or DSCSA, you can send your emails to, I'll just spell it out, WDD 3PL requirements. All one word, WDD 3PL requirements at fda.hhs.gov. And they will answer your stuff. And a final note, a lot, and this happens this time of year, it's actually been going on since last year, we get a lot of requests for manual overrides. There are certain changes that, as you heard earlier, that when you make them, it requires a new NDC number. You change a dosage form, you change a proprietary name, you change active ingredient, active ingredient strength. Those all require, by regulation, a new NDC number. So if you have to do it to correct an error, we will generally allow for that, but in doing so, we have to request, or we grant, I should say, a manual override of the validations for that. But it's not just that easy. It's a very manual process, as you can imagine, because we don't just grant a override of the one validation that's keeping your SPL from going through. It's an override of everything. So we examine every part of your submission to make sure that in letting you pass this one to correct an error, you're not introducing 5 others. And it's a very manual review process because it's back and forth and getting a person to do it. Consequently, it's very time consuming and we can't get to a lot. And there is a very big backlog of them. So yes, we will grant them, but we can't guarantee that we'll get it through on any particular time or by any particular time. So the moral of the story is, and I was talking with somebody here, I forget whom it was not too long ago. The moral of the story here is review your data and get it right the first time. Do all those strength conversions first. Make sure you choose the right dosage form code first, whether it's a cream or an ointment or something like that. Make sure it's the correct one. Is it a tablet extended release or is it a regular tablet? Make sure you get it right because it's not just tablet to tablet. There are different types of tablet dosage forms. So having said that, again, the moral of the story here is take the time to review it first before you click submit on that initial registration or that initial product listing. As they say in carpentry, measure twice, cut once. So, okay, first, as always, we give preference to our wonderful attendees here. So if anybody in the audience has a question, feel free at any time to step up to the mic. If not, I will start doing a clearinghouse of what's come in on the internet. Oh, and I've got some more from the most recent. You can just put those right there. I'll read this. Okay, I will. And I also like this session because I get to. I promise I won't walk too far out of camera. I'm sorry. I like to use this to test my staff. It's not technically a part of their employee evaluation, but they get nervous when I start asking them questions in public. So this is fun for me. All right. Tasneem, can you reuse NDCs after a certain period of time? You're in red. Oh, it's on. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Not use NDCs anymore. It cannot be reused again. Only time they can be reused is the same exact product is coming back to market with no changes made, then the same NDC. But otherwise, you cannot use NDC anymore, reuse anymore.
Okay, good answer. Let's go with Layla. Do intermediate manufacturers register and list?
Okay, so I always tell people that you have to remember if you are a drug and if your product is in commercial distribution, you must list, right? Or your product must be listed. I should correct that. So is an intermediate a drug? Anything between an API and a finished dosage form is a drug. So the answer would be yes. An intermediate, which again, it has to be clarified every time I get this question. Are you talking about anything prior to an API, or are you talking about the stages between an API and a finished dosage form? The stages between the API and finished dosage form is what we call it an intermediate for the purpose of registration and listing, and it's considered a drug and must be listed.
Since you brought it up, ingredients that might sometimes or perhaps normally be considered not drug ingredients, but might be needed or referenced as an active ingredient. What do you do, or how do you list that, and how do you require those manufacturers to register?
Katie, you want to take that? We actually just had this discussion with one of our wonderful attendees. And this is the example I brought, and I use the same thing. So think about something like ascorbic acid, right? You manufacture ascorbic acid in bulk, and you're thinking about shipping it into US for commercial distribution. This ascorbic acid potentially can be added to a dietary supplement, right? Or it can be used as an active pharmaceutical ingredient in a drug. So if you do not know what product your bulk product is going to end up in, and it has the potential to end up in a drug product as an active pharmaceutical ingredient, then it is considered a drug and you must list it. If the product is known to be only for dietary supplements, for example, or any other products that are non-drugs, and you know that this product, this ingredient is not used as an active pharmaceutical ingredient, then no, it shouldn't be listed. But a lot of times when you import something, especially into a different country, you do not know where it ends up in. If that's the case, we recommend that you list the product as an active pharmaceutical ingredient in this case.
Struggling with, I'm hoping you can give some advice. Gene therapy, ex vivo, genetically modified cells, the viral vector that's used in the production of that product, it's described in a filing as drug substance. However, it's also seen as a critical starting material. As a manufacturer of the viral vector, do we need to list that viral vector? I know it's a very niche question.
We would have to defer to the Center for Biologics, to whomever is likely the review division or office or unit for that particular drug. I feel a little uncomfortable. Yeah, it's a whole class of drugs. I'm sure they have or I would hope they have a policy or guidance or recommendation, but you can send that question to us and we will forward it.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
We're happy to send it to our counterparts or find someone who can answer that.
Will do, thank you.
Okay, another one, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So in regard to being a repackager and a relabeler, if your source drug manufacturer, say for example, they sent you their last distribution, now say they're out of business or for whatever reason they're not updating their drug code, but you do have that last distribution and you know when it expires, do we need to immediately notify you or stop selling the drug since they are not updating their drug listing, or what do we do in that situation?
So there are cases where you're using a source drug where the source drug is not, for example, I'm guessing that these are the scenarios like not certified, for example, or discontinued, right? As long as the marketing end date for the source product is entered correctly, you can continue marketing it until that marketing end date also as a repackaged drug. But beyond that, once the drug listing file for the source manufacturer actually is no longer in commercial distribution, then you're going to get validation errors for submitting your drug listing for repackaging a discontinued drug, basically.
And so, sorry, just to clarify, that marketing end date, is that what their drug certification through date would be if they had put it in there?
So the marketing end date should be the last lot expiration date of the last lot manufactured or distributed.
But if we wanted to see it in the database.
I'll explain. If a product is delisted and the marketing status says completed, even with a future marketing end date, that product does not need to be certified anymore. To us, it is delisted. It will come off the books at the time of that future marketing end date, even if it's a year or two in the future because of the expiration date. But it does not need to be certified anymore.
Okay, so still be going. Sorry, one more question. Second question. So for source drug products, if some of the manufacturers will have different NDC numbers for the different packages that they're providing us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a repackager, you can only enter one source drug NDC. So if we're buying something from someone and they have multiple NDC numbers for the different sizes, what size should the repackager put inside of their drug listing? If we're buying different sizes from them.
As for the source NDC and for those others in the audience who might deal with repackagers, you only identify down to the product level. So if they have different package presentations, it does not matter. You only need the labeler code, product code segments. So that doesn't matter. But if they're doing different strengths, then they have to have different product codes for each of those strengths, and you would be required to have a different NDC product code for each of those strengths that you repackage also.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
the source NDC is only provided at the product code level, which means the first two segments of the NDC, the labeler code and then the product code. The different packaging doesn't matter.
For some of our manufacturers, what they've done, instead of doing the different package codes, they've created a new NDC number for the different size. And so that's
And they shouldn't if it's the same product.
So then we just need to go back to them and tell them, please go back to the FDA and fix your listings.
Well,
You can tell them they can come to us
Yeah.
if they have any questions, but they shouldn't.
yeah,
They shouldn't have
be
different
assigning
product
it.
codes for the same products and different packaging.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, if it's, the regulation says if it's just a change in package presentation, you should only change the package level, or only the package level package code needs to be changed. Is how it's
Sorry.
Councilman?
into the.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So some people have already asked if they can use the DQCP pre-prod for test submissions. No, you can't.
Yeah.
Don't do that. In fact,
We-
we may have to change the URL.
Yeah,
But,
we just set that up for, it's an
just for an
internal testing, we
exercise
set it
today.
up for this, but yeah, no,
So-
don't use.
Please.
To that point though, CDER Direct, we are rolling out a pre-validate feature before you actually click submit to make sure everything's in line. It's available for certain document types right now. We're getting ready to release it for like product listings and stuff, but on certain document types, you will see the pre-validate new feature button up top there. So when you see that, that's a good way to test your thing. If you want to just play around in CDER Direct, you can create all the submissions you want. Just don't try to click submit. That's all, and you can delete them and stuff. So. Any other questions? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Last one, sorry.
Okay, no, that's great.
But for the outsourcing facilities, the 503B
Yes.
outsourcing facilities, when they're doing their reporting of the previous 6 months, if the people they're buying the product from, say for example, within that 6 months, their drug code fell off, is that going to keep them from doing their submission?
Well, so, yeah, yes, but remember the people they're getting their source ingredient from are drug listing, and so as long as they're maintaining that drug listing annually, then it's okay, unless they don't certify or they delist. This idea of something falling off, that's only the outsourcing facilities themselves that have to keep identifying each NDC they compound every 6 months.
Okay.
But to that point, yeah, and I mentioned this again, but I'll emphasize it again that outsourcing facilities, if you are using if you are getting your ingredients, your active ingredients from somebody else, you are not manufacturing them yourself. That company you're getting it from must have a drug listing. That must be an actively listed and certified NDC. For now, David, a couple of questions about reservation. I'll just sort of read them through real fast. Some of these I'm not sure what the first one means, but you can clarify how someone can do an NDC reservation or get to it. First one is, what is the website for NDC reservation? Let's just do that first.
Well, the reservation is obviously through CDER Direct. So you would go to that product listing and submission tab on the CDER Direct page to access the NDC reservation. From there, you can select a drop-down.
Yeah. Do we have to reserve an NDC number as a CMO if we are responsible for the PLD's listings?
It's not a requirement, as I mentioned. It's solely as a tool to keep down any ambiguity between different CMOs that are listing for a specific PLD. The problem that we were running into is that we would have multiple CMOs selecting the same product number. And so the FDA decided, hey, let's give them a reservation. And that way you could set aside a specific NDC number under a labeler code that's reserved specifically for that CMO. So it's merely to keep down formatting errors and obviously duplication errors when you have multiple companies listing on behalf of a PLD.
Can I just add one thing? Is when you sometimes there are certain companies that they distribute packages. I can't say them, but they're like major drugstore chains and things like this. And sometimes it's quite a challenge to find an NDC code because they have so many. So in those cases, if you're in that situation, you're a CMO, and you're going to be selling to a large company that has lots of NDCs, and they tell you find an NDC, because we hear that. If you're in that situation, by all means, I would reserve an NDC. That way, you don't have to worry about somebody else after you've decided and you've got your artwork all done, and then somebody else comes along and takes that NDC from you. That would be really hard to explain to the boss. So definitely want to reserve in that situation.
Yeah, we always say that this NDC reservation is definitely helping two groups in particular. One is the companies, sponsors that have drug in development. They have an application with FDA, and they're submitting labeling, and they would like to add their NDC to the labeling that they submit for review. So if you choose to provide your NDC at the time of your submission for application submission for an NDA or ANDA, then we recommend that you reserve your NDC just to be sure that NDC is available for you to use if you want to do that. We had a situation where a company had an NDC on labeling, and they were under impression that NDC is part of application approval process, and they thought that the product can be marketed under that NDC. They started printing all sort of labels, and when they tried to actually list the product, they realized that the NDC needs to be changed. So for that group, please, if you are planning on submitting an NDC as part of your labeling review, make sure you reserve the NDC, or send us your questions if you have any questions to make sure that you can use that NDC for that application product. And then the second group is what we were discussing here, the CMO and PLDs, especially when the PLD has a large number of products manufactured by different contract manufacturers.
Troy, would you like to tackle the difference between using CDER Direct and just submitting something through the ESG? And can you use both? Should you use both? How do you transfer from one to the other?
Well, we normally recommend people to use CDER Direct because it's a more friendly user, and we have more control of the SBL file. Like I mentioned earlier, if there's a request for manual override, it'd be much easier for us to retrieve the SBL file, whereas we have to go a couple steps just to get the SBL from the ESG group. But if you currently have ESG and you want to convert to CDER Direct, you can do so. All you have to do is copy and paste the set ID and make sure the version number is one higher up, and you should be good with CDER Direct. So.
You can also, that's if you want to retype the whole SPL. You can also, just using the pragmatic form, the X form, if you have a saved version of the XML file, you can also use pragmatic or whatever software form you're using to submit through the ESG. Save a version of that file and then upload it into CDER Direct.
Or you can send out an email request for the SBL file.
Yeah, you
we'll
can
send it to us.
request the version of the SPL from us also. Thank you. While you're up there, please discuss how to list fragrance, and I'll insert, and other inactive ingredients, which are confidential. How do we identify confidentiality in drug listing?
So in the drug listing, there is a box you can check for the confidential. If you don't, for some reason, you don't list it on for the public to see. So all you have to do is check the box, and you should be keep it confidential.
And there's you can also identify, for those of you who work for or have PLDs as clients, you can identify your contract manufacturers as confidential also. So that even though we don't publish the contract manufacturer listing data, we will also redact on the PLD listing before it gets sent to DailyMed and all that. We will redact any establishment identified as confidential on that also. David, back to you. I had it. Here it was. It said, I didn't use the reserve NDC option when I listed. Instead, I actually registered with a label, a draft label, with a future start marketing date. can I or should I update the SPL to change it to back to reserved until the date?
No, once you've submitted it going forward, the listing, then obviously you've gone beyond the reservation period. Keep in mind, the reservation is solely for products that are not in commercial distribution. So once you've done that, if there's an error in that submission or you need to change something, then you would, in essence, you would have to submit a new NDC for that product to change it to something else because it's gone through that formal process. So that NDC that you created in that particular case has already been established.
Right. And to add on to that, one of the, whether you want to call it a benefit or a pro or a con, in using the a future start marketing date versus a reserved NDC. If you are uncertain about when a drug might be approved or when you might actually launch it, a practice we have seen before, and it's okay to do it this way if you want. I think it might be a little more work, but is to pick a future marketing date that's really far in the future, like we've seen 5, 10, 20 years, and then as you get closer to your launch date, it does require you to submit an update and then change that start marketing date to a more accurate and closer date. So we have seen some companies do that. A potential con to that or something against that is that you still have to know all of your listing data up front. You have to get the formulation and strength right. You have to have the right dosage form and all the things that cannot change with a drug listing. You have to get it right that first time, even before it hasn't been launched yet. Because once you list an NDC and you link it to this set of product data, you cannot reuse that NDC again. Remember that. So those are the types of corrections where I was speaking just before this session about, measure twice, cut once. Review this stuff, make sure you get it right the first time, and then you don't have to go through and we don't have to go through the laborious manual override process.
So let's just pretend that you didn't hear that 10, 15, 20 years that he suggested. So town halls are not the only good times for you to test us. It's only a good time for us to go to our director and say, well, we just created that NDC reservation because we don't want you to use that far of a future market. Because, I guess, supposed to speak. Because if you're not sure about a product launch, you shouldn't be listing it, period. If it's that far in the future, it's not advisable listed at all. So don't hold up NDCs with 20-year future marketing start dates.
Okay. Thank you. And this is similar to a question we had earlier, or at least something that Layla touched upon in a related question, but since we were talking about future start marketing dates, let's go to the other side about end marketing or marketing end dates. Suppose you have an API manufacturer makes a drug and of course they stop manufacturing the drug and put a future end marketing date, maybe whatever the expiration date is for the API, 2 years from now. But you still have product beyond 2 years made from that API. Do you need to delist, or what do you do? Anyone care to handle that, or do you want me to? Go ahead. Oh, okay. Thank you. I love to hear myself talk. Thank you. No, you don't have to delist yours. You can keep your listing the same, but as soon as you produce another batch with another API, assuming you continue your business and find another supplier, as soon as you produce another batch and introduce it in the commercial distribution, you need to update your drug listing immediately to identify the new API manufacturer and, of course, ensure that that API manufacturer is registered and that product is listed. Yes?
I just wanted to tack on to that. So if you have that end manufacturing date on either a finished product or the API, will there be, and it's in commercial distribution, will there be any issues of it coming across border for the next 2, 3?
Well, again, that's an import question, and I can't tell you what is going to be detained and what's not going to be detained, but standpoint, a product is listed until it actually reaches its marketing end date. So they are able to view it at their end as a listed drug, even though it has a future and marketing date, and there shouldn't be any listing issues. And if there is, they can always come to us for verification.
Don, where was it? Can a foreign manufacturing facility register themselves, or do they have to have a U.S. agent do it for them? And what other advice can you give about choosing a U.S. agent into the...
All right, they could do it themselves, but they still have to have a U.S. agent. So they could also have their U.S. agent do it, and some of the U.S. agents do it. However, one of the things that has happened in the past is sometimes the U.S. agents, they stop being U.S. agents, and they get all the email, and then the firm finds itself out of compliance and doesn't understand. And then suddenly now you have people at that firm scrambling to try to figure out how to do an SPL. So, don't get in that situation. So I would say this, it's always good to have things coming to the company itself, unless the company, if you're a company, it's a great idea to make sure that you get copied on everything so you know what's going on. And I would not necessarily hand over the reins to a U.S. agent. And it's not to disparage U.S. agents. They're great, and I would say 99% of them are wonderful. But we have run into problems sometimes where they just stop doing anything, and they don't notify anybody, and they just exit, and firms are left with their products not getting into the country, and then everybody's scrambling. So.
That also reminds me of the subject of an authorized agent, which is not necessarily the same as U.S. agent, but there are issues with sometimes submissions that are sent by people that are not authorized by firms to send those submissions. So make sure that the company that you are submitting registration on behalf or drug listing behalf knows that you are doing it and authorizes you to do so. If FDA knocks on someone's door for inspection and they have no idea that their drug is being imported into US and they're registered by someone else that they don't know anything about, that is a problem. So try to make sure that this is an agreement and you are authorized to actually send that information on their behalf.
Thank you for bringing it up. Yes, we have noticed, I don't know if it's a trend or it's just we're aware of this situation now, but we found several cases this year of companies registering particularly foreign firms without the foreign firm's knowledge. So if you work for a firm, and we've even had a case of a very large foreign firm had two different consultants working for two different divisions of that firm who didn't know about the other guy, and they were overwriting each other's work as they would submit back and forth and say, well, I didn't do that, I'm just going to correct that drug listing, or I'm going to correct it was actually the registration. They kept changing the business operations on each other. So, and of course, with us, they both complained to us about the other guy, and we, it's up to the company to designate and maintain who does their submissions for them. They can do it themselves or they can hire people. So we tell you, work it out amongst yourselves. Just a situation to be aware of, and as Layla said, always make sure that you have their authorization, or as the company representative, you're working with a consultant, make sure they have the authorization to do it. Tasneem, how do I know if my products are certified? How do I verify that? Where can I look on the FDA website?
Well, the NDC directory.
To the microphone.
Sorry. The NDC directory would tell you whether it's active, and the certification status, the status.
Certified, right. Which field could they look at in the expiration?
Yeah,
So in the NDC directory, well, we have actually multiple ways. She's thinking of the U that we do to flag certain records. Within the NDC directory, even now, as we are inactivating uncertified records, we still identify any active record that's uncertified that has not yet been removed. And there's a U next to it that means uncertified, and it's a limited record. But there's also, you can always look at the certification or certified through date, listing certified through date. That's essentially the expiration date of the listing. If it's in the future, it's an active, currently certified record. Now, here we are in the renewal period here, the fall renewal period. If it only says December 31, 2019, it's only good through the end of the year, and it still needs to be certified for 2020. It says 2020 or December 31st, 2020, you're good to go until next year. Where was the other one? Troy, back to the, this goes towards the ESG or X Forms versus CDER Direct. If I listed my product through, we'll just say another software product through the ESG, can I certify, can I submit a blanket no change SPL that I created through CDER Direct?
Yes, you can. That's the short answer.
Yeah, and again, so long as you get the, the NDCs right and such. Reggie isn't up here, but maybe one of you all can answer. I have 2 or 3 questions about a new set. When can you clarify when, why, or what's the deal with using a new set ID each time you do a blanket certification, or do you use the same set ID each year you send in a blanket certification?
I think the set ID is different for the certification every year, so you can't use the same.
Yeah, it is. It's so every year it's a new blanket no changes certification. So a new set ID. You don't need to link blanket no changes SPLs over across the years, because the list of product NDCs might change from year to year. So there's no need to keep the same set ID year to year. You have to maintain the same set ID for listing updates. And one more time, I'm going to rehash it. This will be for Layla. It's the whole CMO versus PLD. So the specific question here is, but again, this is just to repeat the responsibilities of a contract manufacturer versus a PLD. The specific question is, if Company A is the application holder, Company B is the contract manufacturer, and Company C is the authorized private label distributor, who's responsible for the PLD's submissions? And actually, and I'll provide this answer, what's the citation that says we have to do it? And it's 20741.
So we have this example of Company A, the sponsor, Company B, the contract manufacturer, and Company C, the private label distributor. Company A, who's the sponsor, is not assuming manufacturing any drugs, so they do not register. And because the product is not distributed under their name or label, then the drug should not be listed under their name or label. So from the registration or listing standpoint, they have no obligation, Company A. Company B is the contract manufacturer. Contract manufacturers are required to register and list, so they submit their registration and they renew it annually. And they submit a drug listing using their own NDC, which does not require the content of labeling. They just submit a carton label, they submit it to us, and they renew their registration annually, as I said, and they certify their drug listing annually. Company C is the private label distributor. Their drug is manufactured by Company B under their name and label, under the PLD's name and labeling. The drug that is manufactured for Company C must be listed, and it must be listed, the responsibility falls on Company B, which is the contract manufacturer, to submit that drug listing, unless Company C, which is the private label distributor, assumes responsibility and works as the authorized agent on behalf of the CMO to submit their own drug listing with the PLD's labeling, with the full content of labeling and everything.
Before I move on, are there any questions, at least here in the audience? Is anyone still fuzzy about the requirements of PLD and its contract manufacturer when it comes to who registers, who lists, what we expect to see? List. So,
Seized drug must be listed, and we can't tell you which one submits drug listing. In this case, it is the responsibility falls on company B, the manufacturer. But if company C chooses to, which is the PLD, they can also submit drug listing.
so
No. Well, B has to submit their own drug listing.
yeah, correct. Yeah, so
Yeah.
to summarize, the sponsor applicant does not have technically any registration or listing obligation if all they do is own the application and maintain that. It's a separate, they have their own
Yeah, unless they're
responsibility.
distributing the drug or the drug is distributed under their name, yes.
Right. So as long as they own the application and however it is they're making money off the contract manufacturer and the PLD, they don't have any registration or listing obligation. Contract manufacturer must register and must list the drug under its own NDC. The PLD must have, and I'm going to say this a different way, the PLD must have its NDC, must have its drug listed under its own NDC, but the ultimate responsibility belongs to the contract manufacturer. But if the PLD chooses to do it, they can act as an authorized agent. They can choose to fulfill their own or regulatory destiny, if you will. But if they do it, they assume the responsibility of getting it right. Anything else?
You also have to remember that the marketing categories for these submissions are different. So a drug listing that is submitted for a PLD, so it is a drug that is in the market, it is physically available on the shelf, right? So this drug must be listed using the appropriate marketing category. It can be, for example, an NDA, an ANDA, even an unapproved drug, whatever that marketing category that drug fits in must be used to list that drug. The drugs that are listed for a contract manufacturer, however, is what, for the lack of the better term, a lot of people refer to as the phantom listing. So these are drugs that are manufactured for another entity. The contract manufacturer does not distribute them in the marketplace, and that you don't see the actual drug with that contract manufacturer's NDC on the shelf anywhere. So they basically use one of the marketing categories that ends in under contract, manufactured under contract. So there are examples like OTC human drug manufactured under contract, or NDA manufactured under contract, or so forth and so on. But you have to make sure that you choose the correct marketing category for the contract manufacturer's drug listing, which then triggers those different set of rules. There is no need for content of labeling, for example, and the data is not released to Daily Med and is not published in the NDC directory.
That actually answers, there was a very specific question about the specific marketing categories. How does the CMO differentiate their listing so that it does not appear in Daily Med? You have to use that, whatever type of drug approved or manufactured under contract. That's how we know that's a CMO listing, and we won't push that out. I had another couple of questions just quickly to highlight another type of marketing category. If for companies that market or that manufacture a product for export only, we have a marketing category for export only. The labeling requirements are obviously reduced. It's not required necessarily to list if all you do is make it and ship it out of the country. However, many other countries require an export certificate from the FDA. They require that you follow GMP. So our export certificate office, if you would like to obtain, it's called a certificate of pharmaceutical product. They check your registration status, your latest inspectional status or results, and whether the product is listed. So in order to list, and if you only want to list for export only, you can choose that. And that actually reduces, one of the requirements it takes off is that your labeling has to be in English. You don't have to have English labeling if you choose export only.
You also have to think about if your product is rejected and it has to be shipped back into US. So.
Yeah, it's true. So think, yes. Who wants to answer this? This goes towards our set of repacker questions, and it's kind of just another way to reword it, what was already asked. It says, I am a repackager. What do I do if the source NDC has been considered expired and removed from the database? So if we inactivated a source NDC, what does the repackager do?
Go with another source NDC.
Yeah, it's that simple. Sorry. Well, you can talk to your source, to that company, and say, hey, listen, you haven't updated your listing. But if they're out of business or they're not making it, you can't claim it as a source NDC.
Well, basically, the truth in the matter is that your product has to be compliant, right? It doesn't matter if you're an applicant, if you're a manufacturer, if you're a private label distributor, if you're a repackager. If you're a repackager, your product is compliant if the source product is compliant. If the source product is not compliant, we highly recommend that you do not use it as a source drug, because then you encounter a lot of problems when trying to list that product.
All right. I'm going to do one more question from here, from my list from the internet, but I want to open it up to the floor one last time. Do you all have a little clicker? Any last chance? Feel free, if we're hanging around here, I'll be around here for a while. If you still have some question or even one of those in the weeds things, feel free to approach me or any of the staff if you want to catch them before they head out. Finally, actually, before I get to that, I want to, it's not, I flipped to this because I thought it was on my list of helpful links. Several questions, again, that was in a lot of the presentations, but if you want to check, if you ever need to verify your registration status, your listing status, your certification status, you can go to the FDA website, go look up the NDC directory. You can look up, you can not only look up your own certification status or listing status, you can use that. There's one question about how do I prove my certification status to my clients and to my customers. You can point them to that and say, look at the listing certified through date. That's your proof to them that you have a currently certified and active listing. And if your company's name and DUNS number and address appear on our drug establishment current registration site, we like to pronounce our acronyms, the DECR site. That's your proof to your company or to your clients and to your customers that you are currently registered. And if they still question it, you can send them to me. That's okay. Give them my name, and I'll, for whatever it's worth, whether they like me or not, I can verify for you that they are certified. Thanks again. I hope it's been helpful for you. It's always helpful for us to be able to connect with you guys. I met a few new people here, made a few new friends, reconnected with a couple of folks that I see either once a year or less, but I communicate on a regular basis through email, so it's always good to remember those names and put those names to faces and stuff. And just as a final thank you, I want to recognize my entire eDurlist staff here, both those that are present here and those that were unfortunately unable to show up. I'd like to thank Rosemary Cook, our office director. She had to go back for other obligations, but thank her for getting us going in the morning. And again, as one final reminder, all these helpful links and emails, feel free to take advantage of them. That's what they're there for. That's what we're here for. So thanks again. Travel safely, and we hope you are taking something home with you. Thank you.